Hi, and welcome to another video on learning Photoshop. Now, have you ever tried to photograph a high contrast scene only to find that the pictures you took are complete rubbish? I know I have. But don't worry if you have, it's not just you. Even with perfect exposure, there are some images that will always tend to have the highlights blown, the shadows flat, or a bit of both. And it can be very difficult to get it right in one shot without resorting to filters. And that subject in itself brings with it its own steep learning curve using filters. But there is a solution with HDR, or high dynamic range processing. Now this is where we take bracketed shots at different exposures and then we use software to blend them all together to give us access to the whole tonal range. In addition, we can let our creative juices flow and take our images off in new and creative directions. A problem that I've found with HDR is that the software can create halos around high contrast edges, and it very often really oversaturates the colours and makes it really difficult to get it looking realistic. Now this video is not about how to do HDR, it's more a comparison of two different methods that I've tried out, and I was well impressed with one that I wanted to share it with you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to process 7 bracketed shots with HDR software and then compare it with an image processed partly with HDR software and finished off in Camera Raw. Now there are many software packages on the market for creating HDR images. My tool of choice is Photomatix. So let's dig in. First, let's talk a bit about bit depth. Now again, this isn't a HDR video, so I'm not going to go into great depth on this. But bit depth is basically how many shades or tones that a pixel can record. Now as an example, a JPEG image is called an 8-bit image, and this can record 256 shades or tones per colour channel. Again, I'm not going into the maths of it here, I just wanted you to understand some of the terminology. Now a RAW file is something between 14 and 16-bit, and that can record over 4,000 shades or tones per channel. Now HDR takes this even further. HDR works at 32-bit, so it can handle thousands and hundreds of thousands of shades or tones per channel. Now HDR software all works at 32-bit. So okay, let's make a start. If you want my files to work along with, then they're available to download from my website. Just follow the link in the notes under the video. So here we've got my images here. I'll just deselect them and I'll click on the first one and shift click on the last one to select all the images, and then I'm going to drag them over the Photomatix icon. So I'll just drag them down. Now I know you can't see them, they've gone off the screen, but Photomatix will open up and I'll drop them into Photomatix, and then I'll click OK. It'll bring up this dialog, and this is just highlighting the images that I'm going to be using. The important part of it is this part here where it says show 32-bit unprocessed image. I want a tick in there, so this will then bring it up and won't bypass it. And then I'm going to click OK. It'll bring up the Merge to HDR options dialog. For this exercise, I'm just going to leave everything as it is, and I'm going to click Align and Show Degaussing. Right, here we are with the degaussing options. You can see it's brought the image up. Now degaussing in software is to allow for slight movements between the exposures. And what it allows you to do is to pick a whole image or one part of the image to use as the base image, so you don't get blurry. So if there's grass moving or there's trees moving, you can actually get rid of those with the degaussing. Now in this case they were taken on a tripod, there's not much of a movement between them and there's no leaves or anything, so I don't really need any degaussing. So I'm going to put it on automatic, and what it does is it'll pick an exposure. So here it's picked the 500th of a second exposure to use as my base image, which I think will be fine. And then I'll click OK. OK. Here we've now got a 32-bit image. So I'm just trying to make it a little bit bigger, but you can see this is the 32-bit version of the image. Not very impressive, but then none of the screens of today's quality can actually display 32 bits of information, so it looks pretty ropey. But don't worry about that. It's got all the information from all those 7 images embedded in it. And what we're going to do now is just save this out. But I'm going to save it out from Photomatix as a TIFF file. So I'm going to go to File and Save As. And I'm going to save it out as a floating point TIFF. You've got a couple of options on here, the radians, some EXR files, but I'm going to save it out as a floating point TIFF. This is a 32-bit file. So I'll just call it 32-bit. And I'll save it back into that same folder where my original files are, and I'll click Save. And you'll see that'll appear here now in that folder. And that I'm going to process later in Camera Raw. Okay, so I've now got a version here, this 32-bit file. And what I'm going to do now is tone map it. And what this is doing is this is bringing us back from 32 bits down to 16 bits where we can display everything and we can work with it in Photoshop and in Photomatix. So I'm going to click on Tone Map and Fuse. Now here we are in Photomatix. I'll just minimize Photoshop and Lightroom just to simplify things a bit. Oh, that's a bit better. Yep, so now we can see we've got the image here, we've got a histogram, and then we've got all the sliders that we can actually tweak this with. And it doesn't look bad to start with. It's not bad where the sliders are. But for me, I would normally just probably leave the sliders as they are. We can smooth the highlights a little bit. If you've got a little bit of a grainy sky, you can smooth the sky off. We've got control over as white point and as black point, but you can see we've not got a bad histogram here. We've got a little bit of clipping at either end. And what you will normally find is the problem is you will start correcting one end, so you'll start correcting the highlights and it'll actually make the shadows worse and vice versa. So it's a case of, you see, if I start moving this slider, you'll see that I'll probably get it a little bit darker, but there's more clipping going on. And you can see that I'm getting darker in these shadow areas. So it's a little bit of a compromise. You just move the sliders till you find something that you think works. Probably the saturation in the highlights. Well, if I take that down to 0, you can see the majority of the highlights is in the sky. So I'll pull that just to see if I can blue that sky up a little bit. And then the shadows is really in the building blocks and a little bit on the ground here in the grass. So I'll just try and tweak that a little bit just to get us an image that we think's okay. Well, that grass is not bad. It's probably still a bit hot, so I'm going to go back up and just take the colour saturation down just a little bit. And what I've done now is I've processed this image. It's called tone mapping. I've tone mapped this image. I've brought it back down from 32-bit to 16-bit. And now what I'm going to do is save this out. So first I need to apply the tone mapping. So I'm going to click the apply button. And this is going to bring it back as a 16-bit image. There's some finishing touches, but I'm not going to bother with any of that. I'm just going to click done. And now I'm going to save this out, but this time I'm going to save it and it will open in Photoshop because it's a 16-bit file. So I'm going to File, Save As. I'll save it into the same HDR folder, but I'll call it 32-bit tone mapped, and I'll click Save. And that now opens the image in Photoshop. So if I want to now, I can actually do some more processing on this if I think I need it. And for the comparison purposes, I'll leave it as it is. The sky's not bad. I don't think that's a bad image as it is. Okay, let's go the other route now. And what I've done is I created, if you remember, that 32-bit file. So let's go back to Bridge. You can see down here at the bottom we've got that 32-bit floating point TIFF file. Well, what I'm going to do now is open that up in Camera Raw. So I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to select Open in Camera Raw. I'll just bring that in a little bit again. Everything's different sizes. There we go. Right, and I'll now try to do some, because I've got a vast amount of information in this file now that I can access. And you can see the difference. This exposure slider on a normal raw file would go from +5 to -5. If I take this right over here now, you'll see I've got +10 to -10. So I've got a much bigger latitude to make any corrections. So let's just drop that down a little bit, the exposure. I'll add a little bit of contrast. Let's bring the highlights down again, try and give that sky a little bit of clarity. And then I'll open the shadows up. And I probably need a little bit more exposure, that's better. Now I'll set my white and my black point. Now a quick way of doing this is to hold the shift key down and double click on the slider. And that will actually set the white point for you. And the same with the black point. And what this is doing is just maximizing the tonal range. So if you watch the histogram, what it did is it just jumped into the edge and it just makes sure that you've got a full tonal range. And now the clarity. I love a bit of clarity. I'll just pull that over to add a little bit of interest and pop to the image. Now it's still a little bit wishy-washy, so I could use the vibrance, but what that's going to do is that's going to basically increase the saturation of everything. And what that's going to do is really wreck my grass, because the grass I think is pretty good as it is. I don't want it too green. So I'm going to go up to the HSL panel. And a little trick I like to use is to go to the luminance tab and basically darken the blues. And what this is going to do is add a little bit of interest to that sky for me. And then the second thing, I'll go to the saturation panel and I'll increase the saturation of the blues. That's going to make that sky a little bit more interesting for me. Okay, I think we're about done. There is just one extra point thing that you can actually do with this image now, so I'll go back. If you've not got enough detail in this, you can actually start using brushes. So I could use the adjustment brush now and add even more detail in. So I'll just show you what that's like. I'll just click on the adjustment brush. I'll max out the clarity. I'll leave everything else set at 0. And what I can do now is just paint in areas that I want some extra clarity. Well, I might as well do it all now I've started. I'll just do it quickly. There we go. Right, I'm now going to open this image and then I can save it out. So I'll click Open Image and then I'll do a save. I'll do File, Save As, into the HDR file. I'll save it out as a JPEG. I'll call it Processed. Not processed, I'll call it processed. And I'll click Save. And then OK. So let's have a look now at a comparison to see if there's any difference at all. So here I've got my 32-bit tone mapped, which I did through Photomatix. And here I've got the 32-bit that I've done basically by using the same 32-bit file, but I've processed this through Adobe Camera Raw instead of letting Photomatix do it, because I think that Photoshop does a better job of some things than Photomatix does. But we've got all the advantage of the 32-bit file that I've got through using Photomatix. So now let's just see if we can compare these a little bit closer. I'll do this as a 2 up horizontal so I can see the images both on the screen at the same time. And we'll have a look first at the tone mapped image. So let's zoom in a little bit on this if we can. We'll say get it up to 66% and just have a look at a couple of bits of the detail. We'll put it somewhere there, and if I'm looking at that, I don't know what it's like on your screen, but on my screen it's a little bit soft, and this does tend to be a problem sometimes with HDR images, and especially if you don't capture enough to detail in your exposures, enough latitude in your exposures to capture all the detail. But there we've got that. That's not bad. Let's see if we can compare it. So I'll go up to 66% with this one, drag it back down a bit, try and get it more or less the same, and you can see here that I've got a tremendous amount more detail in this. I think overall I think it's a lot sharper, it's a lot more distinct, and there's an awful lot more detail and contrast in this image. And you can see if you look here in this area that area is quite soft and wishy-washy really. In here we've got a nice bit of detail and contrast over this shadow line area. So that's it. A comparison between fully processing using HDR software or generating a 32-bit file using HDR software and processing the image using Adobe Camera Raw. I'm sold on it. Have a go yourself and let me know what you think. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos on learning Photoshop and learning Lightroom. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.